Hi, my name is Bob Bricault. I'm from MSU Extension and I'm a consumer horticulture educator, and we're here today to talk about pruning methods, and we're going to be looking at this common lilac and talking about why it needs pruning and method for pruning it, and then we will get into the pruning and show some of our tools and talk about that a little bit. This common lilac gets overgrown over time. As you can see, there's some bigger stems here that are fairly large in size compared to some of the ones growing around it. If this is allowed to keep growing like this, the older stems will dominate the whole plant and the lower portion will die out. So if this gets too old, all you will have is leaves and flowers up at the top of the plant, and it won't be the plant that you originally intended to put in. So what we're going to do today is show a method to prune this plant, to renew it so that there's always continuous growth and new flowers coming out throughout the plant, making it look more like a bush instead of a small tree. Another reason for pruning lilacs is that some of the older stems eventually start to get a lot of dead areas, like right in here. These are caused by an insect called lilac borer. They feed under the bark and they start to kill areas under the bark, and eventually the main stem might totally die. So if we can remove some of these older stems, we can renew this plant, get rid of some damaged stems, and create a bush that is more full all the way to the ground and full of flowers in the springtime. You may be wondering, when is the best time to prune lilacs? Usually our recommendation is to wait until after it's done flowering in the spring. That way you preserve the flowers, you enjoy them, and then you can come back and prune after it's done blooming. If you choose to prune before the blooms are out, of course you will be sacrificing the blooms themselves, but it will not harm the plant. Before we begin today, we're going to talk a little bit about the tools that we're going to use. Probably the most common tool that I use when I'm pruning is a bypass hand pruner. Bypass in the sense that it acts like a scissors. The blades don't hit each other, they pass right by each other. So with this you get a nice clean cut on both sides of the stem. The other thing about tools is that it's better off using a tool that matches the job that you're doing. This hand pruner is good for cutting into a stem that's maybe up to about a 1/4 inch, maybe a little bit more in diameter. Beyond that, it becomes too much work and not much like fun if you're having to actually try to saw with something like this. This should be a nice clean cut. Second tools that we will use probably to go after some of the bigger stems are the saws. Here we have a hand saw. Doesn't collapse obviously, but it's a good saw. It's narrow on the end for reaching into a shrub. Does a good job on the pull as you're cutting. Maybe an easier one to get into really tight spaces is this collapsible saw. What I like about this collapsible saw is that it has a locking mechanism that keeps the blade from collapsing on your hand as you're trying to cut. It's a much smaller blade, as you can see. It can get into some tight spaces and has a really nice deep cut that makes it a quick cut. The last tool that I'll talk about is a bypass lopper. And just like the bypass hand pruners, it has a blade that acts like a scissors. It doesn't have an anvil that it hits, so it's actually cutting on both sides of the blade. This is a great tool for going after something that's maybe up to 1.5 to 2 inches in diameter. Beyond that, I use the saws. The one thing about pruning that I would tell you is important is that if you match the right tool to the right cut, it'll be a much more enjoyable task. When I get started to prune, one of the first things that I think about is getting rid of the dead wood inside of a plant. Because if you get rid of that, then you can get an idea of what is left that will need to be pruned. For instance, on this lilac bush in the back, on the inside there's a number of stems that are dead, and you can tell that they're dead. The bark is cracking, the buds aren't coming out as they are on the rest of the plant. So you can see that and figure out which part of the plant is dead before you start to make your decision on what to prune. To get at the stems that I have to reach into the middle of the shrub, oftentimes you can't get your saw in there, and you have to clear out some of the other dead and some small stems that might be in the way, so that you can make an easier cut into this plant. So I'm going to go ahead and cut a few stems that are in the way. To actually get at some of the stems that I need to remove, there's a couple dead stems that are in the way, and there's a few other little branches that I've already pruned out so that I have better access to be able to get in there with a saw. Right now I'm going to take out this dead stem right here. Now that I've cleared a path into the heart of this plant, I can easily use my handsaw, which is better at taking out some of these bigger stems. And there we've got the dead removed, and we have access to the bigger stem, which is alive, but the one that we really wanted to take out. And the third stem that we're going to take out is right in the middle of the plant, kind of one of the taller stems. And that's that. And then we'll come back and we'll cut the lower portion of the stem with the saw. Notice that the final cut on this stem that I'm removing is as close to the ground as I can get. With renewal pruning, we only take out about 1/3 of the stems each year, so we could actually come back to this shrub next year and take out 1/3 more of the bigger stems to allow more growth to come up through the middle. But right now, for balance sake, we're going to take out a couple of branches that are just a little bit bigger than the rest of them, like this one right up here. I'm going to leave some of it, and that would be a branch that probably would come out next year, but at this point I'm not ready to do that. But I would like to remove part of this branch for now. Now our last task for pruning this lilac is one that you can decide for yourself if you want to do. The lilac tends to spread out, and you can see these stems are coming up from roots and making this plant spread out. But in this case, we really do want to contain the plant. So we're going to go ahead and prune out some of these. Now chances are they will sprout back, but you can come back out here very easily and keep cutting them off. We pretty much have accomplished our task of removing the older stems, 30% of the stems, so this plant will renew and grow back into a fuller plant. So the task is fairly well completed, and it was fairly easy, just with a couple of pruning tools that are very common to all of us. There are some additional things that you could do. You could walk around this plant and try to shape it up a little bit more if you wanted to create more of a rounded effect. There's a couple branches that are sticking up above the rest a little bit, but truly it's not necessary. There are still big stems in here at the base of the plant, but again, we don't want to remove them all at once, just a little bit every couple years to remove some of the older stems to allow new growth to come in, fill in, be beautiful, flowering, and have a gorgeous lilac in the spring.